The most dangerous weapon on the battlefield was never a blade or a bullet. It was the lie the enemy believed without question. Long before satellites, drones or thermal cameras, armies survived by manipulating what their enemies thought they saw. Not just hiding, but misleading, confusing and deliberately feeding false information. Camouflage was only the surface. The real mastery lay in deception tactics so clever they reshaped battles before a single weapon was raised. And once you start looking closely, you realize something unsettling. Some of the oldest tricks were also the most effective. One of the oldest battlefield deceptions was simple but devastating, making the enemy believe they were outnumbered. Ancient commanders understood human perception well enough to exploit it. Rows of spare shields lined on hillsides, helmets placed on poles, extra campfires lit at night. To a distant scout, this wasn't decoration. It was intelligence. In ancient China, generals used dummy soldiers carved from wood and dressed in real armour, positioned along walls or ridgelines. Roman forces spread tents far wider than their actual numbers, creating the illusion of a massive encampment. The goal wasn't just fear, it was hesitation. Delay gave time to reposition, reinforce, or escape. Here's the clever part. Reconnaissance in pre-modern warfare relied heavily on patterns: size of camp, smoke columns, movement at dawn. Deception worked because it mimicked those exact patterns. Nothing looked suspicious. Everything looked normal, just larger than expected. Visual tricks were only half the game. Sound carried far, especially at night, and ancient armies weaponized it with precision. Horns, drums, bells, chanting. These weren't just morale tools. They were carefully timed illusions. Greek forces used synchronized shouting and shield strikes to simulate advancing troops when none were moving. In forested terrain, echoes amplified the effect. Mongol riders famously dragged branches and noisemakers to create the sound of massive cavalry movements, masking their true positions. For survival-minded cultures, sound deception was practical knowledge. Noise draws attention. Controlled noise directs it. Hunters used the same principle to herd animals. Armies scaled it up. The enemy reacted not to what was happening, but to what they thought was happening. And once panic sets in, logic collapses fast. Before modern mapping, terrain was intelligence, and smart forces learned how to rewrite that intelligence in real time. Footpaths were erased, fake trails were cut, camps were deliberately placed in misleading locations. During medieval conflicts, retreating forces often backtracked through streams to erase footprints. Grass was trampled in one direction, then reversed. Fires were built and abandoned to suggest prolonged stays. Scouts followed these signs with confidence, straight into ambushes or dead ground. In desert warfare, deception became even more brutal. Armies marched at night, rested by day, and covered tracks with branches or animal herds. The enemy saw nothing and assumed nothing was there. That assumption killed more soldiers than any weapon. This wasn't guesswork. It was survival math. Before standardized uniforms, identity was flexible and manipulable. Colors, banners and armor styles mattered, but they could also be borrowed. Ancient and medieval forces routinely dressed, captured soldiers in their own gear and released them, spreading false reports from within enemy territory. In some cases, entire units wore enemy colours during night operations, attacking supply lines before disappearing. Confusion delayed response. Commanders hesitated to act, fearing friendly fire or misidentification. Even in early World War II conflicts, soldiers learned to modify uniforms subtly, altering insignia, removing identifying marks, to pass briefly as non-combatants or Allied units during retreats. This wasn't about disguise alone. It was about exploiting hesitation, because uncertainty slows decisions, and slow decisions lose wars. One of the most dangerous deceptions was pretending to be weak. Feigned retreats were legendary for a reason. From ancient steppe warriors to medieval cavalry, luring enemies into overconfidence was a repeat-winning strategy. Units would abandon camps deliberately, leaving behind food, weapons, even wounded soldiers. Scouts reported victory before it happened. Commanders advanced aggressively. Then the trap closed. This tactic worked because it aligned with human instinct. Victory feels real when it looks earned. And once momentum builds, stopping feels like cowardice. The brilliance here wasn't deception alone. It was emotional manipulation. Ancient commanders understood fear, pride and greed long before psychology had a name. Not every deception involved soldiers. Civilians were part of the environment and sometimes part of the strategy. Fighters blended into farming communities, trading tools for weapons when needed. Camps were hidden inside villages. Supply movements disguised as merchant traffic. In early World War II resistance movements, this tactic evolved further. Fighters learned to disappear into routine life. Recon units couldn't distinguish threat from normality. Surveillance failed not because it was weak, but because the environment was deliberately boring. The lesson is uncomfortable but important. The best camouflage isn't hiding, it's being forgettable. These deception methods weren't clever accidents. They were repeatable systems. They worked because they were grounded in human behavior and environmental reality, not technology. Modern survivalists still study them for a reason. Misdirection protects resources. Controlled visibility prevents conflict. Understanding how others perceive you, your movement, noise, patterns remains critical in any hostile environment. Even today, people reveal more through habits than actions. Ancient tacticians exploited the same truth. Here's the interesting part. Many of these techniques required fewer resources than direct confrontation. Deception conserved energy, reduced casualties and reshaped outcomes quietly. That's why they persisted for thousands of years. Before modern sensors and surveillance, war was fought as much in the mind as on the ground. Deception wasn't a backup plan, it was the main strategy. And those who mastered it survived longer, travelled farther and shaped history more deeply than brute force ever could. These weren't myths. They were field-tested solutions forged in real danger. And once you recognize them, you start seeing deception everywhere. In movement, in silence, in what's deliberately left behind. That's the legacy of before modern times. If you want more true stories of forgotten survival tactics, battlefield ingenuity and ancient problem-solving that still matters today, stay with us. Like the video if this surprised you. Share it with someone who loves hidden history. And subscribe to Before Modern Times, because the past still has secrets worth knowing.